and welcome to this special episode of our podcast. Today, we are shaking things up a little, bringing the learning to you in a way that truly embodies the spirit of blended learning. Why? Because we know that time is precious, especially when you're balancing teaching, planning, and in this case, exploring the beautiful city of Paphos. Podcasting is an incredible tool for education, but we also recognize that incorporating it effectively into your teaching practice requires structure, strategy, and most importantly, time. That's where blended learning comes in. A powerful educational approach that helps you design lessons that are not only engaging and efficient, but also create space for innovation, discussion, and even real-world connections, or rather, especially for real-world connections. Today, we will introduce to you a few key blended learning models that work particularly well for integrating podcasting into adult education. Whether you are looking to enhance content delivery, foster independent learning, or encourage critical thinking, these strategies will help you maximize your impact in and beyond the classroom. So, hold on to your headphones, take a deep breath of that fresh Mediterranean air, and let's dive into how blended learning can transform not only your teaching, but also the way your learners engage with the content. Let's get started. A few years ago, I was asked to present blended learning to an audience of educators in Belgium. I think it was in Ghent. In any case, I was told, Crystal Jade, you only have a tiny amount of time, so this is not going to be like a course. And you're going to have to present this topic that you're extremely passionate about, but in a tiny amount of time. So I had to find a way to do it. So now, today, we have the extra challenge of doing it only via audio. So what I will require from you is please to switch on your mind's eye. Ready? Okay. So please imagine that you have in front of you a paper airplane. So let's say you have the opportunity to fold and create a paper airplane, and perhaps you've done this at some point in your life, hopefully. And on this paper airplane, you get to write one word or one phrase. This word or phrase has to do with the destination that you would love to reach. This destination could be a literal place, or it could be a life competence that you want to build, a personal goal that, again, you want to achieve. But within the context, of course, of our course, I want you to think about what goal, what destination do you have for yourself as an educator, but for your classroom as well, when it comes to utilizing podcasting in education. Okay, so just think about it. You might not still know what that is, but just start to think about it. Now, paper airplanes, again, are hopefully something that you've all experienced. You've all created one and you've all flown one. And what's interesting is that when we had the time to go around and ask people about their associations or their memories of paper airplanes, what they would say would usually fall into two main categories. One category had to do with memories from childhood. So a time where they would create the paper airplanes, fly them, and they would be smiling and having fun. So generally quite a positive emotion. And then the other category would be one that would basically be the opposite of that. Specifically when we asked educators their association of a paper airplane would be one where, imagine you're in a classroom that is just so chaotic. This paper airplane's flying all over the place. There's a lack of control, lack of discipline. So probably not the best association, probably not the best feelings associated with it. Yet, paper airplanes remain the same. They're just paper. Or are they? Paper airplanes are a symbol, and symbols get their meaning based on the associations that we make with them. Examples of symbols could be, let's say, a heart. So we generally associate that with the feeling of love. So hopefully some good emotions there. A name can mean something positive, but at the same time it could mean something negative because we've had a bad experience with a person that has that name. However, a lot of the times these symbols do not on their own hold meaning. These symbols can get their association and their meaning based on the intentions that we have for them. Meaning, what is it that you want to get out of a symbol? In our case, since we are talking about paper airplanes, that same paper airplane that could be used just to have fun. So probably within a classroom, one would say could be a waste of time, or could be used to perpetuate chaos and lack of control in the classroom. That paper airplane, if you think about it intentionally and strategically, could be used to teach so many things. It could be used to teach physics when you look into the concept of aerodynamics. If you were to ask students to, let's say, follow instructions, fold their paper airplanes, then stand on a line, fly that paper airplane, measure the distance over several flights, and find the average, could be used to teach mathematics. Because they would have to tabulate data, add up the total, the different distances that it travels, and then divide by the number of times or flights. At the same time, if students were to fold different types of paper airplanes and then compare them, as in compare their flights, compare the distance that they fly, how they deal with drag, how long it takes. That could be used to, if you were to ask intentional questions, could be used for critical thinking. If they had to observe different types and try to fold different types of airplanes that had difficult levels of folding or structuring, it could also be used for perseverance. There's so many possibilities that could come out of a single paper airplane based on the intention that we have for that object. And the same goes with blended learning. Blended learning is not the concept of just having technology in a classroom that combines face-to-face and online learning. It has to do with how do I use whatever it is that I have at my disposal within, of course, the context of blended learning, but how do I use everything so as to be as strategic as possible to serve my why? And my why in this case is my student. As in, how do I use, again, those tools at my disposal to help them learn as effectively as possible, to love to learn, to build those skills, and so on and so forth, to achieve essentially whatever my goals, my destinations might be. The same can be said for podcasting in education. So this is the mindset that I would like you to have? How will we use podcasting in education very strategically and very intentionally to get us to the destination that we envision for our class? And of course, this destination does not have to be only something that you have in mind, but perhaps it's something that you need to discuss with your students so that you come to a common destination and a common why that you're working towards. Now, let's go back to blended learning. Blended learning, well, the term of it at least, was one that became especially popular during the pandemic. Now, there's some good things that came with the pandemic, but what also came with it in regards to blended learning was perhaps some misinformation. Probably the concept of blended learning that a lot of people know, and this was also shown through research, is that in their mind, it's a combination of online, so e-learning, and face-to-face classroom work that come together to become a blend. For others, it's also a combination of traditional classroom methods and online digital media. Even today, if you go to Google and search, give me the basic definition for blended learning, what you will find is the following phrase, and I quote, "It's a style of education in which students learn via electronic and online media as well as traditional face-to-face teaching." Let me say this again, and please be aware of the phrasing of it. It's a style of education in which students learn via electronic and online media as well as traditional face-to-face teaching. Now, this definition is by no means incorrect. However, it is problematic if someone takes this definition as the be-all, end-all of what blended learning means. And the reason it is problematic is because of how things are not only generalized, but how they're phrased. If you noticed, a lot of the gravity of that phrase was placed on the electronic and online media. In particular, it was phrased in such a way where it's almost like it said it's just a combination of electronic and online media and traditional face-to-face teaching. Now, taking that as a be-all, end-all can create confusion because it misinterprets, misrepresents, and misinforms, as it does shift our focus to the tools. It shifts our focus to the online learning environment, or the LMS. That would be the learning management system, where, however, blended is not about its tools, and it's not about the online learning environment. It's not about the LMS, so the learning management system. Although, keep in mind, it is a necessary characteristic, and it's not technology integration. High-quality blended learning has a very particular focus. It is learner-centered, so its why is the learner. It values learner participation and engagement. It acknowledges the existence of varied mastery levels among learners and the need for effective differentiation. And what do I mean by that? At any time, at any given moment in a classroom, are our students the same? Do they have the same needs? Do they come with the same background knowledge? Are they even the same on day 1 and day 2? The answer is no. They're not the same. They don't have the same needs. They have, again, varied mastery levels. So at any moment, you would at least at a classroom have the beginners, the intermediate, and the advanced learners in regards to the mastery level of any particular concept or skill. Because of these three things, blended learning is mindful of its methodological components elements and tools and is focused on leveraging them, using them strategically and intentionally to assist with those three aforementioned points. So, how can it be learner-centered? How will it value learner participation and engagement, all the while keeping in mind that we have varied mastery levels amongst our learners and that we need to effectively differentiate. So, blended learning, yes, it does incorporate, of course, an online component and a face-to-face component, but it's about strategically and intentionally using its tools, technology, an online learning management system to allow for repurposed time, learner engagement, teaching effectiveness, and giving the learners the best possible learning experience. Now, let me make things a little bit more clear or specific. The concept of blended learning, at least let's focus on the online component, is not the fact that on its own it has an online component. The blended component, the online element at least, has to do with the LMS, so the learning management system. A learning management system could be anything from Google Classroom, which you are using in this course. It could be Teams. It could be any system that is hosted online. This is very important. It's hosted online in order to help manage the learning process. It's blended not because there's an online component, but because there is a learning management system that happens to be online and is there to help the educator understand at any given moment where the students are in regards to progress, in regards to their mastery level, so that based on that immediate feedback that they would get from an LMS, they would be able to effectively differentiate in a classroom. And let me just give you an example of what that could look like. So we are using Google Classroom. Okay? Now, let's say, and I'm not going to go into this too much because I want you to answer a few questions in just a moment. But we have certain questions that are happening. So instead of a handout that is printed out, this exercise sheet is placed online. All of you get to answer when you're ready. And because of that, because it's placed on a learning management system, I get immediate feedback to understand where you are. Because of that immediate feedback that I have, it allows me to make a decision strategically on how to help you, on how to differentiate. So if, for example, I have 4 students that have the same problem or same challenge, then I will bring those 4 students to the front to help them specifically with that challenge that they're facing. I'm not going to repeat the same example in front of the entire class and waste their time. Instead, I will differentiate based on needs. I will group students based on needs, at least when it comes to intervening or explaining and so on and so forth. Repurpose time. We will come to in a minute. But for now, what I would like you to do is ponder on these 3 questions. You have the opportunity, by the way, in this instance, to when I ask this question, before going on to the next question, you get to pause, think about it, literally hit the pause button, make a note if you want, a mental one or a written one, and then come back so that we can go to the next question. So the questions that are going to come up now have to do with whether or not this phrase indicates blended learning. So, you ready? Phrase number 1. Students use laptops in class to take notes. Is this blended learning? Yes or no? Think about it and pause. Let's go to the next phrase. A teacher uses an interactive whiteboard and a projector during a lesson. Is this blended learning? You get to pause. For homework, by the way, this is the third phrase. For homework, the teacher sends students videos on how to prove Pythagoras' theorem. And in class, the students are asked to prove it. Is this blended learning? Yes or no? Normally, in a class, what would happen is I would give you a Google form. You would get to answer this Google form, and you would get immediate feedback, not from me, but from the system itself, because I would have already placed the answers into the system. So let's answer these questions. Students use laptops in class to take notes. Is it blended learning? It's not blended learning. This is just use of technology at school. So it's technology integration. You might say, why is this not blended learning? Well, let me rephrase. Imagine, now I would phrase this sentence in this way. Students just use laptops in class to take notes. They only use laptops in class to take notes. Is this blended? No. Let's move on to the next one. A teacher uses an interactive whiteboard and a projector during a lesson. Is this blended? No, it's not blended. It's just technology integration. Let's move on to the next one. For homework, the teacher sends students videos on how to prove Pythagoras' theorem, and in class, the students are asked to prove it. Is this blended? The answer is it is blended learning, and specifically it uses the flipped classroom model. Okay, so let's break it down. Keep in mind that these questions were not created by me. They were created by UCL. And they were, I suppose, also phrased in this particular way to also show how important it is when we create questions to be very particular about what we mean so that questions are not misinterpreted. So, for something to count as blended learning, whatever happens in the LMS, so let's say in this case, in a normal class, you would be using your Google Classroom. You would click on this Google form, you would answer it, you would get immediate feedback, and based on these findings, we would have a discussion about it. So whatever would happen in the LMS, so these questions again are hosted online through the LMS, the learning management system. Whatever would happen there would directly inform what is happening in the classroom. So this is a prerequisite for something to count as blended. Whatever happens in the LMS needs to directly inform what's happening in the classroom. Otherwise, if you're just using technology, it's considered technology integration. They're similar, but not the same. Both great, but not the same. But really, blended is so much better. Now, what we did just now, or we would have done in real life, if we had a computer in front of us, the fact that yes, this exercise was hosted online and you got immediate feedback, maybe not from me directly on an individual level, but the system gave you immediate feedback. This is blended because it also allows me as an educator to manage the learning process. Now, earlier I said blended is better. It's much better. Why is it much better? It's much better because it recognizes the problem with one-size-fits-all formula approaches in education, whether primary, secondary, or adult education. It does not teach to the middle. Teaching to the middle if we are to envision this, means literally we're using the lecture technique where we're at the front of the classroom, we're giving our lecture or theory, whatever it is that we're teaching, whether or not it looks practical, does not matter, because we are at the front and we're saying it once or twice, and we're expecting at any moment that all mastery levels, so beginners, intermediate, and advanced, to all get it at the same time. But really what happens is that it's just the middle that gets it. The beginner group is lost, either because they don't have the base, either because you're moving too fast. The middle is getting it just right, more or less. The advanced group already knew quite a bit, or they understand it fast enough, or way faster than others. So that means they're also not challenged, which is also a waste of opportunity. Blended helps us not teach to the middle, and we're going to see very soon how does it achieve that. Again, it's much better because it's learner-centered, learner-focused, meaning it asks, okay, so this is my why. I need to focus on helping my learner as much as possible, which means it has to ask the question, if I am to put things online, if I transfer them online, if I use podcasting in education, if I use whatever innovation there is, if I use it just for the sake of it, is it really going to help my why? Is it really going to help my learner? And if the answer is no, it's not going to help, then the answer is clear. Do not use it. Because at the end of the day, blended learning is simply about great teaching. It's about quality time versus, or rather, it's about quality time via repurposed time. Repurposed time. What is it? Repurposed time is probably what it really sounds like, what you might already think it is. It's about repurposing the time that we would usually spend presenting theory in that lecturing style. And how do we, if we were rather to take away that time, how do we now use it more effectively? And this could be anything from breaking the class into groups, watching a seminar via the LMS, could be hands-on learning, could be group work, or could be small group private sessions with teachers, could be using podcasting in education. But for any educator to have this luxury of time to do anything, or rather to do more than just presenting theory or having that be the majority of the time spent in a classroom, that means that they have to find a way to still teach that theory that is very necessary, but do it creatively. So what blended learning does is, via its flipped classroom model, what it does is it no longer teaches theory the traditional, let's say, way, but instead what it does is it records a flipped classroom or a flipped podcast in our case to introduce that concept. It places that recording, whether audio or video, on your LMS, and your students get to watch or listen to that ahead of time at home as many times as they require, as fast as they would like. They get to pause as many times as they require, and then they get to come into the classroom more prepared and now ready to focus on the implementation of knowledge. And why is this necessary? Because again, we said that every student learns at their own pace. You cannot repeat things 1,000 times. You're either going to say it once, and remember, your beginner group is not going to fully get it. The middle might get it just right enough. Your advanced, if they hear it once, twice, 3 times, for them it's a waste of time because they could have been doing something else. They could be challenging themselves further. So what we want to do is use blended, so flipped in particular, that model, whether again in the format of a video, in the form of an audio, whatever that might be, but in our case definitely at least audio, to take away that chunk of time that was used for theory, where they get to listen to that or watch that at home and come prepared so that you can focus on the implementation of knowledge. So what it does, and we will get into the specifics just now, is it creates a lot of shifts. So the lecture position that we had is no longer there, but instead we become facilitators or guides. That's our job. So you will no longer see an educator, at least not that much, being at the front of the classroom teaching, but instead you will see that educator moving around the class, listening to what's going on in the classroom, taking notes. And when they're listening and taking and discerning how they need to help students, they no longer explain things to students, but they intervene when necessary, because they also understand that there's an important aspect of students learning how to learn. Another thing that happens, another shift that happens, is that we no longer have fixed groupings. What is a fixed grouping? A fixed grouping is when we say that in any given classroom with different mastery levels, our beginners will always be beginners, our intermediate will always be intermediate, and our advanced will always be advanced. So we have the blue, green, and yellow. There's many problems with that. First of all students know in which category they're placed, and that can have a lot of negative implications for them. But also it takes away the fact that at any given moment a student on day one might belong to the blues, but the next day, based on their needs, they might belong to the reds or the yellows or whatever group it is, because learning fluctuates. It's never a straight line. So instead of fixed groupings, we have dynamic groupings, because as the educator is free to no longer just be at the front of the class and is now moving around listening, and of course has the LMS or the learning management system to guide them, they now get to create dynamic groupings where, like we said earlier, students are placed together based on their needs. So if 4 students again have the same need, then they're placed together so that educator can just pull them to the front and particularly help them with the issue that they're facing. At the same time, a dynamic group could be, how do we place together different kinds of students? So let's say someone might have been a little bit more creative. Someone might be more academic. How can these different kind of learners benefit from working together? And especially when it comes to something like podcasting in education. Another shift, and perhaps one of the most important ones, is that no longer do we only focus on knowledge, because that's all the time that we've had. We had to explain standards, stick to the curriculum, stick to the syllabus within the time frame, and it's been very difficult. But with the use of blended, what we will see is that yes, of course, we do have to teach knowledge, so curriculum and syllabus, but now we have the time to also focus on skill development, on competency development, on mindsets, and once more on the implementation of knowledge. And doing so also means that there's a shift of no longer are the learners passive recipients, but then they become active participators. Learning is no longer a chore and an obligation, but it slowly starts to develop a love for learning. And students not only learn what's necessary to survive when they leave the classroom, but they also have the opportunity to develop all those things, and especially the life competencies, in order to be able to thrive in a world that again deals with so many challenges, including the UN SDGs that we have talked about. So, to wrap things up before we start talking about how this practically works, high quality blended learning has specific variables. Number one, it has high expectations for all. But when we say that, it doesn't mean, okay, I'm expecting every single student, let's say, to get 100%, and then we just watch them fail. It means, yes, I have high expectations for all, but when doing so, it means I make sure to give them the tools in order to set them up for success. So it's learner-owned as well. So they learn to learn on their own. It's learner-paced. It's goal-driven and mastery-based, meaning that the variable now is not so much the time, because, of course, within the limitations that we all deal with when it comes to the Ministry of Education or any educational system, is they often say you have 1 week to teach X, Y, Z. And then it doesn't matter where your students are, you have to just move on. The problem with that is that if a foundation has not been created, what is the point even sometimes to move on to the next chapter when that chapter meant that there had to be prerequisite knowledge that had a good foundation? We lose them. This time, with this methodology, we are given the opportunity to allow students to only move on once they have mastered a specific, whether it's content or knowledge requirement, and so on and so forth. And of course, we keep in mind that it has to be engaging. The learning process has to be engaging. Now you're going to tell me, Crystal J, these all sound great promises, but how on earth do we actually achieve them? And that would be a very fair question to ask. So how does it do it? It does it with the blended learning models. So imagine now, we've already said, okay, of course, blended is a combination of face-to-face and online, sure. But the online component, remember, has to do with the fact that there's a learning management system that is hosted online to help you manage the learning process. So we're there now. And then underneath, we have the 4 main blended learning models. So we have the rotation model, we have the flex model, the a la carte model, and the enriched virtual model. The rotation model has subcategories. We have the station rotation, lab rotation, flipped classroom, and individual rotation. Now let me make a note here. A lot of people, a lot of experts in this domain also believe that flipped classroom actually is its own category. So it doesn't really fall under the rotation model. For us, it doesn't really matter, because we're looking about how can we practically use these different models to help us design a lesson plan that is very effective, very intentional, so that yes, we can use podcasting in education, but we're doing it in such a way where, of course, they're learning to develop their life competencies, they're learning to deal with what's happening out there in the world, all while teaching, of course, the curriculum and the content that we have to teach. Okay, so the focus that we will have, the things that we will focus on in this course will have to do with the rotation model, and that's it. We're only going to focus on the rotation model. And within the rotation model, we're going to place particular focus on flipped classroom and station rotation. Whether or not you want to choose lab rotation or individual rotation, that's also fine, but just the general concept of rotation. All right, so let's start with station rotation. Imagine now you're in your classroom. You know what it looks like. But now the tables are arranged in such a way where you've got different stations in your classroom. The station rotation model allows students to rotate through stations on a fixed schedule, where at least one of these stations is an online learning station. And this model is quite common in elementary schools because teachers are already familiar with rotating centers or stations. So to help you visualize this a little bit more, imagine you have 4 different spaces in your classroom. So we've got station 1, 2, 3, 4. And when the time runs out, the ones that are in station 1 go to station 2, the ones that are in station 2 go to station 3, and so on and so forth. And at least one of them has to be an online station. Now, there's many ways to do station rotation. There's something called the horizontal rotation, which we will discuss at another point, because of course I need you to have a look at actual case studies. And within possibilities of station rotation, you could have your students have to go through a specific schedule, meaning they have to first start at 1, then go to 2, then go to 3, then go to 4. Then there's another option where it doesn't really matter where they start, as long as they get to the ending station and they go through all of them. But remember, at least one of them has to be an online station. Examples, at least a few more examples of what that could look like, is you can have one station. I'm going to give you a mathematical example. So an example of a mathematical one would be, we're teaching fractions. And within fractions, we have adding fractions, subtracting fractions, multiplying, and dividing. So we're already talking 4 stations now. Our 5th station, which is where the ending point will be, is one where the exercises or the exit tickets that we will have for our students will be a combination of all 4 of these different types of dealing with fractions. To me, as an educator, let's say, it would not matter where they would start, whether or not they do multiplication first, division first, addition or subtraction would not matter. For some it might matter, but for me, let's say it would not necessarily change the order of things, as long as they learn one at a time, and then I bring them to a point where they had to deal with all exercises at the same time. What station rotation does, and this is where it's very important for you to think about your own lessons, is that what it does is it thinks about the topic that you have to teach, and then it breaks things down into smaller and smaller chunks that are easier to understand. So you think about your larger concept, and then you break it down. So in this case, when it comes to dealing with fractions, already we're talking about 4 subtopics. We're talking again, multiplication, addition, subtraction, division. But within these, there are even more categories. So for example, if we're talking about addition and subtraction of fractions, you can't just introduce them all at once, because there are specific fractions that have the same denominator. So that's one way of adding and subtracting. And then you've got other fractions that have a different denominator. So it requires a different process. So you see already within the stations of addition and subtraction, there's at least 2 more subcategories. So for now, what I'd like you to think about or start to percolate on, and we will discuss this further, is for me to use station rotation, it means that I need to, in my mind or in my lesson planning, be strategic as to how I'm going to create sections of learning that are easier to understand and for students to move from one station, from one concept, a very small concept that they master before they move on to the next one. Let's go to lab rotation. Lab rotation, like station rotation, allows students to rotate through stations on a fixed schedule. However, in this case, online learning occurs in a dedicated computer lab. So this model allows for flexible scheduling arrangements with teachers and other teaching assistants or paraprofessionals, and enables schools to make use of existing computer labs. Now, this happens especially in cases where schools do not have access to tablets or computers, so they have to share a computer lab. Now, for this to happen, however, in this lab, let's say I'm teaching math and someone else is teaching Dutch. We both need to use the lab. So we send some of our students based on a schedule to this lab. In that lab, however, of course, there needs to be another educator for many reasons. One, safety, but two, to ensure that the students, no matter what age they are following your instructions. For you to be able to do this, again, you need an LMS. You need a learning management system that has specific stations and specific schedule for them to follow, so that you, no matter whether or not you're with them at the time, you can follow their progress, and the assistant in that room can help them should there be any need. Now, let's go to individual rotation. The individual rotation model allows students to rotate through stations, but on individual schedules set by a teacher or a software algorithm. Unlike other rotation models, students do not necessarily rotate through every station, but they rotate only to the activities scheduled on their playlist. Meaning, let's say we have station 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but John only needs to go through stations 1, 2, and 5. Or John, because he's an advanced student, he will also go through station 10. Any additional stations might be for those who need a little bit more background knowledge. So in our case of fractions, it's very important to, of course, know your multiplication tables. And of course, there's always students that do not remember them or have not learned them. So it might be some extra material for them to help them before they get into their stations that you've already set. Individual rotation could also mean you have a very fixed schedule, meaning they all on an individual level have to go through stations 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but you want them to learn on their own, so they have to follow that specific order. There's many ways to go about individual rotation, and we will do some practical examples tomorrow together. Flipped classroom is what I would like you to focus on the most. So this is your building block. So flipped classroom, what it is it's a model that flips the traditional relationship between class time and homework. So students learn at home via online coursework and lectures, or podcasts in our case, and teachers use class time for teacher-guided practice or projects. And this model allows teachers to use class time for more than delivering traditional lectures. So just let me say this a little bit more simply. So what we used to do is that during classroom time, we would spend a lot of time on the theory, meaning that a lot of students, again, would get lost or be under-challenged. And then we would send them back at home where they would have homework, and they would get to practice that homework while keeping in mind that there was a huge possibility that they did not really get their foundation right. And this was particularly the case for me at least 10 years ago when at least 10 years ago when I started teaching math, I knew that my students did not fully understand a concept. And because of that, I did not want to give them homework, because I knew that if I sent them home with homework, that they would practice the wrong thing several times. They would start to create those pathways in their brain, and then they would come the next day in the classroom and I'd have to start all over again while not having any time to do this. So there would be a lot of damage done. So instead, what happened was I started recording the videos. It was videos in the case of mathematics, where they would get to watch a very particular section, because remember, you have to really categorize your learning and do it in such a way that it's in smaller chunks of knowledge that are easier concepts for students to understand. So that would be done. They would get to watch it at home as many times as required, and then they would come into the classroom. So that was their homework. So the theory that would normally happen in a classroom was now their homework. They get to watch that as many times as they require, and then come into the classroom at least more comfortable with the concept. And we would now get to focus on the implementation of that knowledge. So what would be homework would now become classwork. And the reason for that would be because if there was a mistake or a misunderstanding in regards to the conceptual understanding as well as the procedural, I would get to intervene immediately. So there would be no opportunity for them to get anything wrong, or rather to build on wrong pathways. So for us, and this is a requirement for podcasting in education, I want you to think about the topic that you're going to teach. And you need to create a flipped podcast, whether just audio or video enhanced, where you introduce the topic that you're going to teach in the classroom ahead of time, where they get to listen or watch that podcast episode so that they're more prepared when they come into the classroom. So that now that you get to remove that section of time that would be in inverted commas wasted, so that you can focus on repurpose time, as well as, of course, the implementation of knowledge. Okay, so I think that's enough information for now. What we will do, of course, we will take the time to see everything one step at a time. We will look at case studies and so on and so forth. But for now, what I need you to do is just percolate on this information and primarily start to think about, okay, great, how can I save some time, some classroom time, by using the flipped podcast, format, so that they can watch or listen to something before class, so that I have way more time in my class to bring in other modalities of learning. So that's question number one. Question number two is start to think about the topic that you've chosen and think about how can I break this topic down into smaller and smaller chunks so that they are easier to understand. And that's it. That's all for now, and we'll see the rest together.